Welcome to Conversations the World Over. I'm Raymond Arroyo. My guest this evening is truly a legend in the music industry. He's one of the most successful rock and roll performers in the pre-British invasion era. He had a dozen top 40 hits in the late 50s and early 60s. Who could forget hits like Teenager in Love, The Wanderer, and Run Around Sue? Throughout his career, though it was booming, his personal life was another matter. I sat down with him a few years ago in his native New York City to discuss his memoir, Dion. The Wanderer Talks Truth, in which he discussed the highs and lows of his storied career, the death of his friends Ritchie Valens and Buddy Holly, and his rediscovery of the Catholic faith that kept him from losing everything. Here's part one of my conversation with Dion DiMucci. Looking at this guitar, I'm thinking of Hank Williams, Sr., not Jr. And I know he was an inspiration of yours.
Absolutely.
When did you first hear him, and what influence do you think he had on your approach to music?
Well, you want to know, my parents, my father had wonderful, wonderful qualities, but he didn't like to work. He would dive off the City Island Bridge, that was attached to the Bronx, or he would be sculpting or painting.
Making puppets?
But he never had a real job. Yeah, he would sculpt and stuff. But my mom and dad she was a real, had an exaggerated sense of her own responsibility, thank God, because she worked hard. So they always argued about the rent. So the more they argued, the better off. I found that, I found the guitar when I was like 10, and the more they'd argue, the better I'd get on guitar. I'd close the door, I'd get in the room, and I'd tune into those. There was a station out of Newark called the Don Larkin Show, and I heard Hank Williams, and I'd learn about life. He would sing songs like, in the world's mighty gallery of pictures, hang the scenes that are painted from life. They hang scenes of love and of passion, pictures of peace and of strife. They hang pictures of youth and of beauty, I'm trying to remember, of old age and the blushing young bride. They all hang on the wall, but the saddest of all are the pictures from life's other side. Oh, the pictures from life. And then he'd go off and paint pictures of people who were going through problems and distress and all kinds of stuff, suicidal thoughts. So I learned I learned about life listening to Hank Williams, and it was him and Jimmy Reed were my. Jimmy Reed was the
groove.
You got me running down, you got me hiding, you got me run, hide, running out where you wanna let it grow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You got me doing what you want me, baby, what you want, yeah, roll. Jimmy Reed. So that's both those guys, Hank Williams and Jimmy Reed. In fact, Raymond, if you took country music in the 50s and you took blues,
right,
and you fused them, you had what we called rock and roll.
Right.
And that was my foundation. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Jimmy Reed and Hank Williams, doing what I'm doing.
And you hear it throughout your career, but in your contemporary work as well. I mean, the directness, the heartfelt simplicity and power, because it's of real life, that Hank Williams wove into the music. You hear that in your songs.
Yeah, they didn't sound like they went for voice lessons.
No. It wasn't top hat stuff. It wasn't the Stork Club. It was,
it was
life.
Yeah.
Life in all its complexities, and you capture it even today.
I call it from the streets,
Yep.
but they would call it from, the front porch or the...
But it's a weird, Dion, it's a weird marriage in that these guys came from the sticks. You were born in the Bronx.
Well, I would say the blues, the way I define it, Raymond, is the naked cry of the human heart longing to be in union with God. And you don't have to be black and from Mississippi in the 30s to have the blues. I'm sure John Paul had the blues the way he grew up with communism and, you know, with
Losing
I don't
his
know,
father and mother, yeah.
the Nazis coming, you know, and all that kind of stuff coming, you know, and that he grew up with, and he had the blues. And if you had, and David, if you look at you know, the Psalms in the Bible, and if you had to retitle the Psalms, you would retitle them the blues, because it's all about people that are broken and damaged, but they're longing, you know, they're crying out to God, and those are songs, the Psalms, right. And they comfort you on the journey home, so to speak.
Tell me about that journey. I want to skip forward, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning of you, Dion and the Belmonts. But let me move forward to 1959, because there is that moment where you're on the bus with the Big Bopper and Ritchie Valens and Buddy Holly, and the bus keeps breaking down. It's freezing cold in the Midwest. They decide to charter a plane to Fargo. You don't get on that plane. You're the only one who didn't. Why didn't you get on? And tell us your problem with the way this has been reported all these years.
Well, simply, they've made movies and wrote books and blogs and plays and so many, you know, over the years. And if as many people who said they flipped a coin with Buddy Holly, if that was all true, they'd need a 747. But I was in the room. See, Buddy Holly chartered the plane. He was an extraordinary guy, Raymond. Mm-hmm. He was 22 years old, and he, on one hand, he was like an old soul, a fearless businessman. Mm-hmm. He was taking flying lessons out at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. He was opening up a record company called Tope. He was starting a publishing company. He moved from Lubbock, Texas to New York. He was married. Maria Elena was pregnant. Mm-hmm. And he was an extraordinary guy, off stage, very decisive, formal, structured, mm-hmm. Just elegant. He'd get on stage, hit the chord, and he'd be, well, baby, baby, now the little things. And you'd hold on to your butt. We're going on a trip. You know, and he was a free abandoned rocker on stage. So I learned a lot from him. I was 19, and make a long story short, the tour was, it was so cold out there in the Midwest with this little yellow church school bus we were on, that Buddy decided to charter a plane for the headliners, because we were the ones making the money. You got to understand, back then, maybe a policeman or a fireman was making $80 to $100. We were making like $800 a week. Mm-hmm. So when he chartered the plane, there was only 4 seats on it. It was a Beechcraft Bonanza plane. It had 4. Mm-hmm. The pilot, Buddy, there were 2 seats. We were in the room. He said, you know, let's flip a coin, call it, you know, and
but you won.
The Bopper and I, the Big Bopper and I, won the coin toss. But when he told me that it was going to cost $36 for a 2-hour flight from Clear Lake, Iowa to Fargo, North Dakota, I said, Richie, you go. It was what my parents were arguing about every day of my life, you know. The rent was $36, and that's like maybe today $400 or $500. I'm not sure, but it was a lot of money. My head hadn't stretched out to that amount of money yet, to spending something like that. So I told Richie, you go, and he took my seat, and I was the only one that survived past February 3rd. You know, the next morning we found out that the plane had crashed, and
What was the takeaway for you? The message there?
For me, those guys affected my life on a lot of levels. You know, who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What's this all about? And I started asking God some questions, or reaching out for, like, God. I didn't know God from a hole in the wall, but I got some answers. And here I am 52 years later with, I think, some answers. And that's the reason why I wrote this new book. It's about coming home.
Yeah.
Even everybody's a wanderer. We're all looking for home, to be safe, secure, home, respected, loved, and knowing who we are or whose we are. And even if we don't know the questions.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for.
And this, what an amazing journey this has been for you. And I want to walk people through it. I want you to relive some of this for us and share it with us. How did Dion and the Belmonts start? This was a group of kids you sang on the corner with, yes?
Yeah, well, I recruited the best doo-wop singers in my neighborhood. One guy was an opera singer, Angelo DeLeo. One guy, Freddie Milano, knew a lot about harmonies, just intuitively. He was gifted with handing out parts. And Carlo Mastrangelo was a jazz drummer who could scat and sing like nobody's business. We'd go down to the Apollo Theater, and by the time we left and got back to the Bronx, we were like, we thought we were horns. So we started making up songs, you know, and I started giving out parts to these guys, you know, and our first song sounded like a group of horns, you know.
Oh, beautiful. I wonder why the first?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, it defines that era, though. Did you?
Well,
you mustn't have been. Of course, you couldn't have been aware of it. You were just taking in the streets and the vibe and the sounds around you, and kind of. But it did define that whole era.
It's an amazing thing that we did it on, like you say, on instinct. It wasn't like we were conscious of, you know. But here we were in a room, 4 guys, 17, 16, 18, and Carlos starts with. And I'm like, and we start singing. I'm singing lyrics. Angelo's in the clouds with this tenor part, and Freddie's in the middle filling in the gaps, and Carlo's like, puedo, puedo, bat, 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 bat. It was like 4 guys doing 4 separate things, and it was unbelievable. I was 16 years old. I was like, it was I would say like a taste of heaven for me. You know?
Yeah, it's inspired. No, it's inspired. You hear it today, and it still has that. Where is this coming from? You watch the video of you guys on television. It just comes out. Yeah. It's obviously not staged, over-rehearsed, choreographed. It's just, it's so natural.
It was made up on the 6th Avenue D train coming downtown.
And what a string of hits. I mean, then you go off on your own. You do The Wanderer. You do Run Around Sue. You have this string of hits. Were you happy?
Part of me was very, one thing my father always gave me was this enthusiasm for life, the wonder, the awe, the mystery of life. You know, he was a character, but he kind of instilled that or encouraged it in me. And getting a hit record is almost, or being popular or famous or successful, it's almost like a narcotic. It is like a narcotic, you know. So I don't know how truly happy I was like excited about a lot of things, but deep inside, you get down in the core. When I was alone, I'd wonder, there's something missing. Something's missing. Yeah, the bank book's full. I got the new car, but who are the people in the car, and how do you relate to them, and where we going, and we're making good time, but we don't know where we're going.
That's a bit of a problem. You said at one point, I don't know, I think it was in an interview I read, you said, success is a funny thing. You can gain it and think you own it, but really, it owns you. Explain that to me.
Well, if you don't know who you are, or if you're not, really don't have a good sense of, like I say, whose you are, and what you're doing here, and your vision, it could own you, and it destroys a lot of people. You could see it.
You marry your childhood sweetheart, Susan. It would seem that your life would be then on an upward trajectory. At that time, you're doing pretty heavy drugs. You'd been doing heroin. You did heroin at 14, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Where were you spiritually during that moment? This is in the mid-60s, getting into the 60s.
Spiritually, I was, I was very, very, to be honest with you, very selfish, self-centered. Now that I look back on it,
Sure.
Inconsiderate, fearful, dishonest. Who knew? I thought I was God's gift to the world. You know,
Don't we all?
I was fighting. I was all wrapped. But you know, deep inside, I would say it was the bleakest, darkest emotional period of my life. The mid-60s. You know, they often say, if you remember the 60s, you really weren't there.
Do you remember the 60s?
No,
In and out, vaguely?
It was crazy for me. There was a lot of, not honest searching, you know, just trying to fill up the emptiness with the drugs and the parties and running. I was running. And it doesn't matter what kind of shoes you got on if you're running. I don't care if you're using alcohol, drugs, pills, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever you're doing, you're running, and there's it doesn't come out well.
In 1967, you are doing drugs, and you relate in the book that you literally saw the devil. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, an illusion, or who knows? You know, I don't know, but I was so saturated with drugs on a daily basis that I was under a stairwell with a pusher, and we were doing a deal, and he like literally turned into the devil. You know, the kind of stereotype, you know, the horns.
Horns and the whole 9 yards.
Scared me. I knew I wasn't in a good place. You know, maybe it was just a sign from God, just saying, you know,
wake up.
Yeah.
Then you and Susan moved down to Miami to change your lives, get a fresh start, shake off the city, and you encounter your in-laws, Jack, your father-in-law particularly, whom you weren't terribly fond of initially. Tell me what happened there. What did you think of him, first of all?
Well, I was never not fond of Jack.
But he
I was more frightened of him.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was
In
frightened
the book,
of...
it sounds like you thought he was kind of a square guy.
No, I was frightened of him because he had eggs for breakfast and had a little prayer book and had these light blue eyes that kind of sparkled, and he would talk about, do you hear the birds singing? And my head was, I'd wake up with a hangover like, oh, I'll go, what birds? What is he talking about? I didn't hear any birds. But, you know, Jack had found he found himself and found God and was trying to reach out to me in the most loving way. He never said, be like me, do as me, think as me, you know. But he would share his experience, strength, and hope with me, you know, across the kitchen table.
Yeah.
But I was frightened of it. I didn't, you know, I could say that now.
Right.
At the time, I couldn't define fright because, you know.
And you, but he was instrumental in your getting off of drugs. Tell me about that moment. What happened there?
Well, you know, he said, at one point in our conversation, I must have been vulnerable, but he started talking about his fears and his struggle. And he said, you know, if you find the God of your understanding, this was his words, he said, God will solve your problem. You can't solve it. It's almost, he said, Dion, it's like we're broken. Our mind is broken. You can't heal or solve anything with a broken mind. You have to reach out. If you find him, he will solve the problem. So, what do you think I did? I saw him on his knees one night, and I don't know what he was doing. It was a profound sight, you know, to see this giant of a man. He was like John Wayne. He had like 40 guys working for him. You know, I thought, what's he doing on his knees, you know? I tried it. I've never been the same.
That was it?
43 years ago, never been the same. Wow. I got off my knees, and God must have touched me. I know it sounds I don't know what it sounds like. These days.
Was it instantaneous? I mean, was it?
Listen,
that was the last time you touched drugs?
Last time. I haven't had a drug or a drink for 43 years.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Wow. You wrote a book. You wrote a book. You wrote a song to kind of commemorate that moment.
I did?
Yes, you did. Your Own Backyard is kind of about this, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. How'd that go? That's so long ago. I've been sitting here thinking about when I started in drinking. I went on to dope, but surely to change my life. I lost everything near and dear to me. Everything, I wanted to be, name me my children and my wife. It was like it's like you think you're gaining something, but it'll rob you from everything. And Jack used to tell me, he said, because he had a problem with drinking at one time. He said, if you walk into a bar room and you throw some money up on the bar, he said, I don't look at it like I'm throwing money up on the bar. I look at it like I'm throwing my sanity. Well, I'm talking about alcoholics. I'm not talking about having a drink.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm not. My wife has a glass of wine every time we go out for dinner. And has all she wants and leaves the rest. I don't know what that's about. But he said, I think of that money up on the bus. My house, my wife, my kids, my sanity, my job, my health. I might as well put it all up there because for me, it doesn't work.
Uh-huh. And now you have a major conversion is what really happens as a result of this time period, right?
I did.
Because you were raised Roman Catholic, Lady of Mount Carmel Church in the Bronx.
I knew nothing about the religion. I knew nothing about being Catholic.
Sounds like the Mother Angelica background. She knew nothing, her family.
I heard
twice
Father,
a year.
Son, and Holy Spirit. That I heard, or I used to cross myself when I passed the church.
And that was it.
But Bishop Peternicone, who was the Monsignor, well, he, at the time, used to call me over and challenge me with a lot of kind of strange, different vision that I got from the streets. Like Rebel Without a Cause was out with James Dean. He'd say, why rebel without a... Dion, come over here. Why rebel without a cause? Rebel for the truth, then you really got something. Then I'd pass by the church again. He'd say, Dion, what makes a man happy? And I'd say, oh, Monsignor, if I could get a date with that girl Susan who moved down from Vermont, what a righteous fox. Monsignor. If I could get a new Gibson guitar, oh, Monsignor, if I could get a hit record, if I could get a Thunderbird, he'd say, no, Dion, the virtuous man is a happy man, St. Thomas Aquinas. Thanks, Monsignor. I was trying, I'll see you later. And I'd walk away and I'd say to myself, what's virtue? I didn't even know what it was. And I'd go back and ask. And for another 20 minutes, I'd get a teaching on virtue. It's a habitual and firm disposition to do the good. And he would get into it. And I still remember it. And so after all these drug-induced years and searching, when I was at my bottom, what do you think I thought of?
Monsignor and his
Monsignor
virtue.
And Mount Carmel Catholic Church. And I wonder where God is in all this. I'd hear Jack, so I said a prayer. And I was... it was almost, I have this feeling, Raymond. The scriptures say, ask and you will receive. So I get this feeling like a lot of people are going to end up at the end of their life at, in front of the Lord. They're going to be going, how come this? How come that? Why? When did you, and he's going to say, well, why didn't you ask? And I never thought of asking. Asking is a prayer. And it never occurred to me. But I asked. And I received, and here I am.
Well, first you kind of went into the evangelical church. You were non-denominational, right?
Right.
And it started a whole new period. I mean, you went from The Wanderer, which I am going to ask you to do a little bit of because it so captures. Do you see that as kind of capturing your kind of tough guy street approach to life early on, or is that a misnomer to try to assign that song to you? Personally.
Well, first of all, let me explain the song. I roam from town to town. I go through life without a care. I'm as happy as a clown with my 2 fists of iron, but I'm going nowhere. So the song turns back on itself, and it's really saying, you know, yeah, I'm this and I'm that.
Happy as a clown, not a happy
Yeah,
character.
No, it's a song that's showing that, you know, it's has a little awareness to it, where the guy just sees for a second, he goes, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, there's a little bitter truth in it.
Right,
yeah,
right. It turns in on itself. And people like Bruce Springsteen saw that. He was the first guy who came up to me. He says, I get that song. Because a lot of people think it's about a lot of fun, you know, and I understand that, you know.
Yeah.
I'm the type of guy that likes to roam around. I'm never in one place. I roam from town to town, find myself falling for some girl, a hot kitty that call mine, drive around the world. I'm a wanderer. I get around, round, whatever, you know. But it was written about a guy named Jackie Burns in my neighborhood who had tattoos all over him. Flo on my left arm,
Right.
Mary on my right. Janie is the girl I'll be with tonight. When she asks me which one I love the best, I tear open my shirt and I show Rosie on my chest. You know, this guy was a character. And a lot of the songs I put together back then were like about street characters that were bigger than life. So I get that. You know, there were guys in my neighborhood that were bigger than life. They deserved a song.
They earned the right to a song.
Yes, they did.
Let me know what you thought of tonight's show and which of our interviews you'd like to see in an upcoming edition of Conversations the World Over. You can always write me at raymond@raymondarroyo.com. Remember, the new show premieres each Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. For those of you outside the United States, go to EWTN.com for airtimes. Next week, the continuation of my interview with rock and roll legend Dion DiMucci. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. The conversations continue. Don't miss them. Bye now.